I think it was Anthony who asked me a question last week that we didn't quite finish up. And that was like understanding when a person has enemies, what do you do? Right? And people speak bad about you, how do you handle it? Okay. And I think the answer is really kind of inside of us, but just to say it out in the words of the Baal Shem, and it's hard because you're emotionally just completely overtaken about such a situation. How dare somebody speak bad about you or or spread a rumor or anything like that? But the first thing, his idea was, the first thing is, which is really the highest level of consciousness that we all have to work on, which is to mekabel b'ahava, to accept it with love, that it is part of a tikkun. Even this too is part of a tikkun, a rectification for our souls, and to accept it with love. It's a high level, but if you introduce the idea and start to accept even the little thing with love, and thank you Hashem when things go wrong, like you order this at a restaurant and you don't get that and you get something else. This is let's simple, right? Or the waitress screws up or the waiter screws up, right? You say thank you Hashem and you accept it. Not that you have to eat it, but you got to deal with it. Like I ordered a salmon, not the whatever. Okay, so accept the fact that this mistake was made with love. And just the Baal Shem Tov goes in to pray for that person. Oddly enough, it's to what in the person should be to whatever it is. When you pray for somebody, works that are that he has to elevate within those. Sorry, did I step out? I stepped out. Okay, we're back. Let's start now. All right, it's a great place to start. All right, here we go. All right, so now we're going to be on Parshas Paraduma. It's called Chukat. Okay, two kind of commandments in the Torah. Is basically for anything in the Torah, but there's one that we're told that like you're not going to understand this one you're not going to figure out, okay? And the other one is called a mishpat. So you have a chok, like a law, and then you have it's logical and what makes sense, right? Many of the laws of our civil laws of how we get along, many of them, a lot of them make sense, right? Don't move the border of your neighbor, right? Don't try to like steal land from him. It's kind of like it makes sense, right? Like in the middle of the night, don't go ahead and move your property line over here this way, okay? So, because that's called stealing, okay? But here we have a chok because it starts off with the chok here, or the stat, or the law here. I think he calls it. Let's see how they translate it here. In this edition, it's called, okay, Hukas, super rational. That's how they translate it. This is the super rational command of the Torah. I love it. They got something, the different kind of, this is the Gutnick edition, okay? The super rational, because it's beyond what we can perceive as rational, and we'll figure out what that is in a second. Why is it beyond? The laws of kosher also are super rational. We don't really understand the laws of kosher, okay? And it was always explained to me when I first got to yeshiva that, you know, if you have a doctor and who knows us and studied us way better than, and understands the body way better than us, and he says avoid this, you know, don't eat this, or, you know, whatever it is, so we'll listen to him. Nowadays we'll get a second opinion, or maybe we'll read online and, you know, whatever. But in those days where we would actually listen to a doctor, okay? So here we start off with the super rational mitzvah of the Torah of bringing a perfectly red heifer, right? Devoid of blemish, and it has never had a yoke placed on it, right? And then you have Eleazar the priest. They have to take it out of the camps. Actually, they take it to the Mount of Olives. And that's where they slaughter it there. They have to actually be on the Mount of Olives. They have to open the doors of the Holy of Holies, the curtain, that he has to be able to see a direct line into the Holy of Holies. And then they slaughter it, right? And then they burn the whole thing, its hide, its flesh, its blood, its dung, everything all together. And they also throw into the fire, they throw a piece of cedar wood, hyssop. Hyssop is zatar, actually. It's a little bush, and crimson wool, okay? Right? Right? And then they throw it inside the fire. So now, after it's all burnt up, it's a big pile of ash. And then what happens is the person who go ahead and burned it, he has to immerse his body, and he is impure until the evening. And the one who burns the cow, sorry, that's the one, right? That's the priest who slaughters it. The one who burns the cow, he also has to immerse his clothes in water. He's ritually unfit until that evening because he has to go and take a mikveh and a ritual bath. Okay. And what they use these ashes for, of course, the classic idea of these ashes is they're used, they water, special water, little pinch in the water, and then they take hyssop branches and they sprinkle it on somebody who's been defiled, who came in contact with a dead person. Someone who has come in contact, who went to a funeral or dealt with the dead, and they're ritual impure. And if they want to go to the temple, you know, you got to go through the system of being, basically, you got to go for a sprinkling on the third day of the day that he became impure, and then the seventh day. He's got to get 2 sprinklings, right? I know in the days of the Messiah, it's going to be really amazing. In the days of the Messiah, how people, you know, they look on the board for like the flights, like arrivals and departures. There's going to be like, you know, when's the next sprinkling? You're going to look for, okay, I got a 2 o'clock. I got to go. I got a 2 o'clock sprinkling. Okay. If I miss the sprinkling, oh my gosh, my day is going to be ruined. Okay. And then the seventh day, you got to sprinkle. You got to, and probably there's a whole group there. They dip in the water and then they sprinkle it on the people. Hopefully you get a little droplet. Droplet. You feel, I gotta feel the droplets. I gotta feel, here's the time where you want the droplets. Okay. So then if you can please mute whoever's not muted. Okay. I'll take care of that. Okay. Okay, fine. No, I don't think so. All right. So the idea here is the mysterious part of this element, which King Solomon was baffled, and of all of his wisdom, he was not able to figure out, was that if you're pure and you approach the ashes, you're dealing with the red heifer, either slaughtering or burning, right? And you're pure, once you dealt with it, you become impure. You got to go take a ritual bath, and then you're impure until that day. But if you're impure, you get sprinkled with it, you become pure. Okay. So in other words, it doesn't follow what we need in terms of our psyche. Consistency. We need consistency. We appreciate things that are okay. It's consistent. We understand, right? But here, obviously, things get switched. The impure person that approaches the red heifer becomes pure, and the pure person that touches it becomes impure. It has a negative effect on how you approach it, which doesn't seem to be. Is this purifying or not? If it's pure, it should be purifying. How come for this dude, it has the reverse effect? It baffled King Solomon. He did not have an answer for it. Okay. And this is where we go now today. Here, let's read here, okay? Because this is really every single thing that we've been discussing, and when we approach the Torah and we look at the Torah from the Hasidic perspective, from the mystic perspective, from the Kabbalistic, the formulas of what it's supposed to be, the Torah is it's supposed to be the soul code. It's a technology, okay? It's a technology that was given to us by the infinite. And we always have to see that. And if you look at it from an external point, as we have been, and we've been raised to all of our years, we've been only seeing that it's stories. It's a storyline about a family that goes to Egypt, becomes slaves, and then come out of Egypt. And we look at it as there's these things called mitzvot, or translated as commandments, which it's not really that. And it happened thousands of years ago. And then there's lots of talks and debates and commentaries and all kinds of interpretations. But if you think about it in terms of the way we can understand things in a way that helps us to deepen our connection to it, to look at it as if it is a technology of the soul. And that's how he opens up here. Okay. So here on the sheets that I gave you, he says this, of course, Zot chukas Torah. This is the statute of the Torah, which the Lord has commanded, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they bring you a red heifer, faultless, no blemishes, right? Every once in a while you hear that we found a red heifer, we found a red heifer, we found a red heifer. Okay? And he's going to point on that right now. All the commandments, kol hamitzvot, are eternal. And the word is nitzchi. All the commandments are eternal in the mind. That's so deep, just that one line, okay? All the commandments have an eternal aspect in the mind. Even though in practice, they require a certain time and a certain action, in thought, they exist forever. For the Torah partakes of God's divinity, or what we call the Torah is elokuto, elokut, right? Which means godliness. The Torah was given from God, and within the Torah is that godliness, okay? His light is in the Torah. He invested God himself in the Torah, okay? It's like how we relate and how we connect is to God is through the Torah, and his letters, his infiniteness, the Ein Sof is shining through every single letter, okay? In the information and energy and the vibrations of the Torah. So it says it's elokut, okay? And his divinity is elokut. God is eternal. So therefore, there has to be aspects in the Torah, all the aspects in the Torah, every letter in the Torah has to have its relevance in the here and now. That's in my own words. As the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov said, and they do teach, the entire Torah must always be found applicable in the mind and intellect, and one can learn from every mitzvah its spiritual illusion in the here and now. And here's where it comes out. Here's where the whole thing opens up, okay? Because they asked the Baal Shem Tov how this applies to the mitzvah of red heifer. In other words, they sat down with their Rebbe and they went, Rebbe, you know, the red heifer, right, which was rarely performed even in the day of the Holy Temple, because you weren't allowed to go to the Holy Temple if you weren't sprinkled with the red heifer on Tuesday and Friday or whatever, the third day and the seventh day. How many, does anybody know how many red heifers we've had in all of history, in all of existence? Only 9. There have only been 9 red heifers. In other words, all the hundreds of years that the first temple was, right, 410 years. The second temple, 420. I don't even know if they had it in the second. Maybe they did. I don't know. But in the hundreds of years, even before that. In all of history, there's only been 9 ceremonies of or perform or doing the mitzvah of the red heifer. Okay, only 9. We are waiting for the 10th. That's the sign of the Mashiach. Weird coincidence, no coincidence. It's hashgacha, we say it. Hashem's providence. I'm driving from San Antonio to Dallas. I got to stop for gas. I stopped in Waco, outside of Waco. I don't even think it was in Waco. And I'm pumping gas, and all of a sudden I'm approached by somebody who says "Shalom," right? And I said, "Hi, Shalom, hi." And he introduced himself as Vendel Jones. Maybe you've heard of him. You can Google him. His name is Vendel Jones. Okay. Now, Vendel Jones, he passed away a few years back. I don't know how many. I knew about Vendel Jones way before because he is an archaeologist, not Jewish, who was involved with the Israeli government, always seeking the temple artifacts. As a matter of fact, this is the person that they made the famous character Indiana Jones out of from. Okay? So Vendel Jones, they didn't want to use Vendel. I don't know where he got Vendel from. Okay? Non-Jewish, okay, but believed in the Torah and the principles, and he thought that he could find the ashes of the red heifer. Specifically, he was on a specific hunt because he knew that if the ashes of the red heifer, if they're touched by a Jewish person who's defiled, it's going to mess it up. Because apparently, you have to find the ashes of the 9th red heifer and then combine it with the ashes of the 10th red heifer. So he knew, and he needed like $60,000-$70,000, to get a team to go ahead and excavate and find out. I think he was involved in the Qumran things also as well. Those were the Dead Sea Scrolls. So in any case, he was a famous archaeologist working with the Israeli government. He was on the hot trail of the ashes of the 9th red heifer. Of course, he passed away, didn't get the funds, and they're still remain hidden somewhere, and we're still waiting for a 10th red heifer to come out. The point here is there's only been 9 so far, and yet here it's in the Torah, and there's psukim and verses and details about it, and why so much, and what does it have to do with me? Even in the times of the temple, what did it have to do with them? If the Torah is nitzchi, what is the nitzchias? What is the eternal aspect of this mitzvah? For me and my mind and my connection, my ability, the technology of soul to connect to God. Okay? That's what they asked the Baal Shem Tov. And he's, of course, smoking his pipe, right? And he answers and he smiles, and he's going to answer them. Okay? So he says, this is so amazing. The answer is so amazing. Right? The Baal Shem Tov answered that this pertains to the ego. Ego. Ga'ava, as they say it, right? Or gabahut, right? Pride or ego, okay? Pride. Now, we're all taught pride is evil, right? You can't have pride. But he's going to tell us something so amazing. The Baal Shem Tov answered that this pertains to the ego. How so? Because if a person acts wrongly and is far from God, and the Hebrew here says, b'derech lo tov, he acts in a b'derech lo tov, whatever that is. V'hu rachok, and he feels distant from God, so distant. The beginning of his reform, right? Hatchala tikkun, no, the beginning of his tikkun. He needs a tikkun. The beginning of his tikkun, the beginning of his reform depends on ego, pride. He needs it. It's a vital thing. Why? Right? So he says, God, the beginning of his reform depends upon the ego and actions that are not for the sake of heaven. In other words, a person could do even a good deed, but he's got himself in mind. And we learned about this before. Okay? Because really, let's say a person could be have other thoughts, right? Of course, right? He wants to recognized. That's the obvious one. And let's say he even does acts that are, seemingly on the external part, it's very giving or very generous, but really he's self-serving. We call this, and we learned this when we were learning the Torah, the Sulam, the ladder. That's called Lo Lishma. And he brings Lo Lishma means not for its sake. Like, are you performing this mitzvah for its sake? Or are you performing it for not its sake, for your sake? Okay. And a person might, and we know the rule is Lo Lishma, Bo Lishma. That's the classic phrase, which means even though if you didn't do it for the right reasons, you want to come to do it for the right reasons. And the Sulam explained that the light within the mitzvah will propel you to become a higher level of consciousness, where eventually you will be able to do it for the right reasons, okay? So people can have all kinds of ulterior motives when they're performing a mitzvah, learning Torah, davening, praying, right? So, right, a person might feel, if they would look at themselves honestly, and we do this a lot, they would say, come on, I'm so distant from what does God want from my prayers? What does my prayers help? What does this mitzvah do? Really, okay? So he might feel very distant from God, right? And he might be knows that all of my mitzvahs, all of my life have been not for the right reasons. They've been not for completely altruistic motives. They were very much connected to me and what happens to me in the end, okay? So he says, for instance, in order, let's say, to show off, a person does a mitzvah in order to show off, right? See how diligent I am. I go to that class all the time and never missed one class. Or he prays, make sure he's always in shul first before everybody else, or last to leave, or whatever mitzvah, okay? To show off. Or let's say, to merit the world to come. That's an interesting one. For this, too, is a type of hidden egotism, right? In that he thinks that it's fitting to God to reward him for his deeds. And this is a big fallacy a lot of people get into, and I've heard many people who are who have been observant for years, observing Torah mitzvahs for years, totally observant. And it is in many books that we know that this world is for the performance of a mitzvah, and the next world is for getting the reward. And it could definitely go up on a person's mind that that's why they're doing the mitzvah, and they could expect a reward, right, in the next world. And that might be reasonable. And the person's doing it expecting, that's such a terrible word, expecting, right? Right? So you would think it's fitting. I worked my whole life, right? I should be getting some kind of, something in return for it. A nice place in the next world, in the Garden of Eden, right? It's like we have to understand, right? Do we understand why we are here? Because everything we've been discussing, and a lot of we've been discussing, has to do with our deepest motivations and our sense of purpose in life, and what are we here for? And as much as we can look at it externally, that we're here to fulfill the mitzvahs, and we can understand that God is going to reward for the mitzvahs, we do know, we've been studying, everybody knows, every single one of my students have always been able to answer, what's the purpose of creation? Right? Bestow pleasure. God willed the creation in order to bestow pleasure. So that means we're got to receive that pleasure. It's much deeper, as we have explained, we've learned for so long, that pleasure is really the connection to God. And that connection to God only when you are in a God-like form, like we say, right? Immutatio Dei, when the form, like forms attract, like energies attract, like, right? So just 1 second. So we were in a God-like form, just like God is only involved in bestowing. He doesn't need to receive from anybody. So to the degree that we are involved in only giving and only in thinking of the other, then we will be in that God-like energy, okay? And then we will be attached to God. In other words, the bottom line is wild of how I'm going to explain it, okay? Before you had a question, Anthony? You had a question?
Yes. Like looking at pleasure from more of like from like God as being the king and stuff, as we're here at his pleasure, at his behest, meaning that whatever he wills us to do, that's what we're doing. And in doing that, we receive an aspect of pleasure, but we're here at his behest or his pleasure.
Okay, so it's a certain mode of consciousness where the pleasure is in being the function of what you're made for. Okay, that is the pleasure. Like you're doing the right thing is the greatest pleasure. Okay, so there has a great story in the Baal Shem Tov. I love it. He was once by this couple, elderly couple, didn't have any kids. They helped him. They were, they hosted him for an evening or a Shabbos, and he said he gave the woman. He says, "I'm going to give you a bracha. You can have a son in a year from now." Right? He gave the bracha, and then he left, and he heard from heaven, and they say, "You chutzpah! How dare you? Now we got to go ahead and reconfigure all of creation. That this woman, she wasn't supposed to have a kid, and now you gave her the bracha, and now I got to reconfigure. You lost your next world. That's it. No next world for you." That's what he heard in heaven about the Baal Shem Tov, right? So then the Baal Shem Tov, he says, "Wow, that's the best thing ever. Why? Because now I get to do it for no reward. I don't have to even think of that, right? Now I get to do it completely for the sake of heaven, right?" And then, of course, as soon as he did that and he was happy, he heard another voice from heaven. He just got it back for that. Go figure. But the idea is, and to the degree, we're here as an expression of the Ein Sof, and to the degree that we can get it, and this is the deepest thought I've been like meditating on this, waking meditation in all my actions, is to finally integrate. We're not here for ourselves. Now, if you can get that, then you're in a completely different level of consciousness, that you're just performing as a function to be a influence or helper for someone else. And it doesn't matter who, whether it's God or whether it's someone else. If you can integrate that idea, I'm not here for me, and that way you leave yourself open then to go ahead and be a vehicle, a vessel, to go ahead and be a greater expression of the Ein Sof that he manifests through you in the world, okay? And you're doing it, the way I look at it, there's three businesses in the world. This is so important. There's three businesses. There's my business, there's your business, and then there's God's business, right? If you get out a lot of problems like this, if you just like, I got this from Byron Katie, actually. She does the work, which is a great mode of therapy. We discussed this a while ago. My business is what I'm obligated to do, right? Your business is what you're obligated to do. I don't need to mess with your business, right? And then there's God's business, and whatever God's business is, whatever he has in the next world, that's not my issue. My issue is, how can I be the greatest right here and now? Just complete, total expression possible. There's so much to discuss about that, but let's get into the text, okay? So just continuing this paragraph, right? A person imagines that he has done something for God, when really, without God's influence in our lives, what are we? In other words, God even gives you the koach, the strength to perform a mitzvah, to pray, study Torah or do an act of kindness, okay? He gives you all that energy. All that energy comes from him. He even puts it in your brain. He even puts it in your feelings. Can you actually really ascribe to him that he's actually putting that all in you? And if you do that really in a real way, okay? Right? So then a person, how can we possibly receive a reward? Okay, so that's the mentality, the highest level of mentality that a person should have. Okay? We're not here even to receive a reward in the next world. Oh my gosh, don't say that, Rabbi. Okay? But the idea here is my business, God's business, right? I have to do and be the greatest expression of the Ein Sof right now as I am existing. I am an energy form, a soul, and neshama expressing infinity, having infinity being expressed through me, not looking to anything. Okay? So, but anyways, let's go back here. Okay? And so, right, like to go back, right? A person might feel distance from God. Okay? He might think, what are my actions? What can I do? Right? However, it is impossible to realize this at first. Like, hey, this is a high kavanah. You're talking way too high, Rabbi. I can't handle this. And the person would remain what we call it in the externalities, or we'll call it the chitzoniut in Hebrew. Okay? Right? Which is he's trapped in a superficial relationship with life. He's far from God. Therefore, it is permitted, and actually he's going to say later, it's essential. It is permitted for him to use pride, ostentation, and self-centered act. For amidst selfish reasons, one comes to selflessness. Okay? Like we always say, lo lishma, don't do it for the right reasons. Don't do it for the right motivations. In order that you will end up coming to do it for the right reasons. But we learned before, when we were looking at the wisdom of the ladder, that kind of formula, right, only works when you have in mind that you will want to end up doing it for the ultimate right reasons. It's hard for us now. We are born selfish individuals. It's natural for us, okay? And the proof of that is look at a baby. He doesn't care about anybody else when you need to change his diaper, right? Or you need to feed him. He doesn't care. He is the ultimate epitome of selfishness, but it's meant to be because this is God's tekala. It's his challenge. He gives us all our own individual challenge of selfishness to overcome. It's natural. It's natural. Okay? Right? On the other hand, selfless worship must be pure and clean from all traces of ego, which will ruin the action. Okay? Ego, then, listen to this, purifies the impure that are distant from God and defiles the pure that are already close to him. For if he or she becomes prideful, they are despised by God. Okay, so let's take a little step back here to get this clear. That if a person feels distant from God, what are my actions? What am I doing? Am I really making a difference? Is what I'm doing really making a difference? Right? A person should not feel that way. My Rosh Hashiva, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, right? He would always push all of us. He would say to us, you have to become the Gadol. That means the great man of the generation. You are the next leader of Am Yisrael. He would tell us all that. And you have to be the B'nai Aliyah, the person that the world was created for. Okay? In other words, he would instill into us this kind of drive in us that we can be the next Moses. Okay? Not like exactly like Moses, but we can be the next great rabbi, a great leader of our generations. He always was infusing that in us constantly, that we thought we were each one of us. And now, of course, after many years of learning, quite a few years, even not enough, where we finally came to the realization that, something, we don't know squat. Let me look at all these books behind me. Do I know anything in them? No. Okay. So, and yet there's masters around who know every single one of those books. Okay. Photographic memory, they were gifted, special souls sent down to us from heaven. We finally came to the realization that we're not going to be the next Moses. Okay. But it got us to a point where we can realize that, and it got us to the point where we can then develop ourselves to still have the love of Torah. But that's not enough. It really isn't enough. That people got deflated, and then when they got deflated, they went back down to whatever they were doing, and then they went to become an accountant or whatever. Okay, but that's not so. Here he's saying, and this goes. So ego. Let's look at it now. Pride is necessary for a person, and this, if he feels any time in the day, definitely in your life, in a phase of your life, that he could say, no, I'm the one. I'm the one. I'm going to make the difference. This, we have this other rule that Rabbi Shimon, he says that a person has to look at the entire world as if it's poised on the balance of merit and demerit, right? Of positive, right, deeds versus negative deeds, right? And a person has to look at it as if the entire world is right at this very moment is balanced. And if you do one positive deed, you balance it, you tip the scales. Now imagine a consciousness like that, and that what you're doing is the most, you are saving the world. Do you believe that you can save the world? Do you think who am I, right? Yeah.
Kind of like a synopsis of what you're saying, but from my own way of looking at it, it's like we're all Kaleems, and we work on becoming the best Kaleem that we can. And any of the Kaleems that God chooses at any given moment can be the Mashiach at that given moment. And it can vary from place to place, to time. But we all have that potential. But we just need to focus on work and trying to be the best Kaleem that we can, so that when he chooses to use us, that his will be done.
And hopefully your ego won't get in the way, because now we're going to discuss that. Because you have to live like two simultaneous realities, or two sides of the coin. You have to be able to flip, as he's going to describe to us. In other words, before you're going to do a mitzvah, he's going to get that like that right now, okay? So, but just now to get back in the perspective of what does this have to do with the red heifer, right? We spoke about the ashes of the red heifer. The ashes of the red heifer. You approach the ashes. If you're pure and you approach the mechanism of the making of the red heifer, you become pure. And already pure approach. He's looking in this red heifer. The dynamic is pride. In other words, pride has two functions. Pride before a mitzvah is going to help a person, and we call the person who's distant impure. That's how it's really being used here in this function, in this scenario. That the person who's distant from God, and this could be in even an interval in the day, okay? And definitely in a phase of a week, month, year, or person's life that he feels distant. That's called it. That he feels distant for whatever reason. And the evil inclination works on him. It works in his head and says, you little shmek tabak. That means a little pinch of snuff. You shmek tabak, what are your deeds? You can't affect anything. You're not doing anything. There was a great story. I heard this by Moshe Weinberger said over this story. There was a certain rabbi in this city. I don't know where it was. And this rabbi was very, very particular when you would pray that it had to be 10 men there who also did not pray. Okay? Because usually there's a different law. If you have 6 men who didn't pray and 4 who already prayed, that's called 10 men, and you can have a meeting with that. This person, this particular rabbi with a very high level, as you'll see, One, it specifically had to be 10 people who have not prayed yet. Can't be a 6 and 4 or 7 and 3. Everybody had to have not prayed yet. Now, there was one guy in this shtibble. We call it the shtibble, which means there's constant minyanim going on. And this guy is dominating. He would have his tefillin on. He'd take it off. He'd go out and drink coffee and talk. He'd go maybe put his tefillin on. He'd chuckle, say a few words, mumble things. Didn't even have an idea, concept of what he's saying. Didn't care. Go out again, smoke a cigarette, come back in, put on tefillin again, maybe say another couple of words, and then he's done. And then it was good. That's how he was functioning every day. That's how he is. That's how he would operate. And then here comes this rabbi, and he's going around, and he needs 10 people who haven't prayed. And this guy did his half tuchas prayer, we'll call it, right? His bogus prayer, as he would look at it. And the rabbi's going around. He got 10 guys, and this guy he was testing. Okay, he was the 10th man. He already prayed before his bogus prayer. And they're starting to pray, and they're praying, and the guys going, and they're back, and they're moving forward in the prayer service. And then the rabbi who's leading the service turns to that guy and he says, "You didn't pray yet." And the guy says, he's busted. He got busted. Okay, but he goes out. He says, goes out. He's dancing out. You know what? No, he died. The guy was out and not even hardly mentioning the word. It had an effect. It was a fantastic thing, okay? Okay? The concept was deeds of the righteous. What are prayer, right? He feels so full. And so then he needs pride. He needs you mentioned about the Mashiach and everyone. And the Baal Shem Tov says this, there's a coma, a stature. That's the language that he says. There's a stature of Mashiach in everyone, and they have to spend their entire lives developing and fixing it. Okay? And a part of that is to see Mashiach in everybody else. In other words, this generally be it. The potential is there. We have to realize it. Okay? And part of that realization is, of course, to give every single person the benefit of the doubt, but as if this guy, okay? This is very, very deep. Now, who are all ego, it's first, okay? So if the person who feels distant, he needs ego, he needs pride, I'm going to be the biggest baddest mitzvah ever, right? He needs to totally come out with this pride in order to approach God, okay? In order to do the mitzvah, in order to enter, he needs that. But the person who's already pure is already holding on a level. If he uses ego, boom! Hashem says about him and a prideful person, me and him can't exist together because he doesn't have any room for me in his world. That's what God says about the person who has pride. Okay? So even who are already pure, now listen to what he says here. They too must always follow this path draw close to God. It's always like even they are using pride, okay? For the mitzvah, in the approach of the act, but not because then they have to flip instantly into the conscious mode humility. They too must always follow this path that requires both pride and humility to draw close to God. Before a person wants to become close to God through or study, he is okay, we continuity is for intellect, mature intellect is just like there is a immature intellect in holiness and a mature intellect in also in the, listen to this, okay? The sitara achara, as they say, the dark side. And what does the dark side say? And it's in all of our minds. Smallness in the sitra achara occurs when the evil inclination tells us, "Oh, you're not fit, right? You're not fit to perform such an important mitzvah or act of worship as this, right?" In other words, you can't. You're not going to be an influence to anybody. You can't possibly. Your effects, your deeds can't possibly have an effect on anything, right? Or why would God like you? Whatever. The evil inclination is in all of our minds and hearts, and it wants to stop us. We say this is a prayer every single day in the evening prayer. The evening prayer, we say in the last blessing, just before the silent prayer, we say, "V'haser Satan," remove the Satan, the Satan, milifanenu u'me'acharenu, before us and after us and behind us, in front of us and after us and behind us. That's what it literally translates. What do you mean remove the Satan from before us and behind us? Okay, there's a Satan behind me. There's a Satan. There's a prosecutor. There's a negativity before and a negativity after. The negativity before, of course, that evil inclination tries to stop us, and it tries so many tricks. And one of them is, "You little shmek you little peon. What can you do? What effect are you? Right? You're not fit to perform such an important mitzvah or act of worship as this." And this is an important thing. I am a servant of the Almighty. Can you imagine yourself saying that? Picture yourself saying that. I am a servant of the Ein Sof, of the unlimited business. Okay? I am a conduit of the unlimited business of the universe. I am a servant. Right? Like if a person was a servant of someone important, okay? Look at it. Usually doors would open. If you come knocking on the door in some office and says, "Yeah, the president just sent me. I need to go ahead and get something and talk to somebody." They open the doors for you. Otherwise, they're going to get in trouble. Right? So imagine now if you, and in America, there's a lot of ego in America, right? Imagine now you having a different kind of ego, that you are a servant of the Almighty. Dr. Rosenstock, you have a question?
That when in the idea of I am your servant, etc., that is the theme of Psalm 86.
Yes.
That is the whole thing.
The
handmaiden and so on.
So, but imagine now you behaving that way. That's like us saying to God, "Your servant," but now you're walking around as the spiritual entity, as a soul and energy with a vibration of, "I am a servant of the Holy One, blessed be He." I mean, I'm a servant of the Ein Sof. Okay, so that's a certain element of pride. Okay, right? So he says, this is how our sages say, why was Adam created alone? So that each person should say, "The world depends upon me." Actually, Nivra Ha'olam. Very big, huge phrase that it brings down in the Gemara and Sanhedrin. Adam was created alone, and each person looks different than the other because each person is obligated to say, for me, the world was created. But that doesn't mean for me, the world was created for me to take whatever I want. No. His translation is good. The world depends upon me. And Rabbi Nachman, the Holy Master, says that you have to look at the chisaron in the world, whatever's lacking in the world, and pray for the world. For me, the world depends upon me. Imagine having that attitude. You wake up in the morning, the world depends upon me, right? Imagine it. Even just for a minute, what's the energy of that? The world is depending upon me, right? My friend Carmen Ingber, he once wrote in his book, is that imagine if 9 SUVs, black SUVs, would curl up in front of your house, come out, and all these secret services, we need you to save the world. You're the only one that can do it. But you're the only one that can do it. We look at your profile and every single thing about you. We need you. Imagine that, okay? The world depends upon him. Lacking this attitude, his evil inclination will tell him that he's unfit to approach God through his action. Thus, he must use his very ego to come close to God, for this is real humility. Unbelievable. Humility. You're using ego. That's the real humility because you're doing the right thing. Humility is doing the right thing. It only seems like pride compared to the evil inclination who seeks to deceive him into thinking that it is a mitzvah, right, to be lowly. That's called a false sense of pride. False. We call that from a Yitzhahara or right, false ego, right? Really false humility. False humility. Thus, his pride purifies him and allows him to draw close to God through his Torah study, prayer, or any good deed. However, afterwards, I have to go a little bit over. Afterwards, when he is actually involved in the act, he must be on guard to all forms of pride. He must humble himself before God and others. And this is called holy smallness, katnut, not thinking that he's better than anyone else because they do not do this deed and I do it. It turns out that feeling egotistical during the active performance of the mitzvah when a person is called pure actually makes it impure, God forbid. Because we only want to be, so in other words, you need ego before you get into the action, and while you're doing the action and afterwards, you become just a vehicle and there's no ego. Okay? So when we say remove the sutton from before me, meaning when before I do a deed. In other words, the sutton or the evil inclination wants to try to convince us not to get us not to do it. Okay? In any way, shape, or form. And one of his ways is to like to think, who are you? And you have to use pride. But when you get into the mitzvah and after the mitzvah, you have to be careful. Remove the sutton from behind us, which means after we've done the act, the sutton might want you, and he will, to get you to feel prideful that you did it. And that's when it defiles the pure. Okay? So in other words, in one act, you have to make sure that you're living simultaneously these two functions. Okay? Now, pride is called a heifer, for it increases and enlarges a person's mind. Okay? Because it's called para. Okay? And para relates to the word fruit. Like fruit is an increasing. Okay? It is also red. On the other side of the coin, this is the Kabbalah of the red heifer, which just means it comes from red, and red, anything red, relates to the side of the left, or we'll call it the shells, the husks, the side, the force, the din, the energy of judgment. Okay, therefore, one must throw into the pyre of the heifer cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson wool. As the Talmud says, one who is proud is a cedar, because cedars are tall, should lower himself like the hyssop. We also had this when we talked about the purification of the Metzora, right? There's this tall aspect and a short aspect, okay? And my Maimonides determined that the rod of a cedar wood must be a handbreadth long. That's a tefach. Handbreadth. Okay? Which means that it's measured. It's not just, oh, let's just go how high we can. It's like you need ego, but not that much. Okay? That is the power and the greatness that a person uses to perform the mitzvah has to be precisely measured to a hand's breadth, right? And immediately after, he must lower himself like a hyssop. So these functions of pride and hiring and lowering have to be involved in the act, okay? And this is called the red heifer that purifies the impure, okay? That means a person who feels distant from God, he needs ego to approach, and it makes impure the pure, somebody who feels that they're already on a level and they get egotistical, that becomes impure. Okay, I'm just going to go out of the room. We're just at the time.